productivity matters to all of us. It should matter to all of us. Don't just leave it to the economists. Don't leave it to the policymakers. Think about it at the firm level and think about it at the individual level, what we all can do.
You are listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Welcome to C-Suite Perspectives, a signature series by the Conference Board. I'm Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board and the host of this series. And in today's conversation, we're going to discuss 6 key drivers to develop and improve productivity in the workplace. Joining me today is Marion Devine, the principal researcher in the Human Capital Center in Europe. Marion, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
So, Marion, you have this wonderful new paper that you've issued on productivity. And I think just to encapsulate the theme, you're essentially saying in the paper that productivity is achieved by balancing the resources in a company to affect, an optimal outcome for the firm. But unfortunately, your thesis is that productivity growth has sort of stopped in most advanced economies. Talk to us about what you mean by productivity. The economists all have these fancy explanations, but tell us what you mean by productivity and what's going on.
For most of us, productivity is this very complex, complicated concept, and we tend to leave it to the economists and the policymakers to talk about it. But actually, productivity is something that affects you and I, and it should matter to you and I. And it's really, at firm level, it's about the company's ability to make the use of all its resources to make really good outputs, which then help the company to be really successful and to give value to all its stakeholders. And some of those resources might be labor and skills, but it might be capital, it might be infrastructure, it might be technology. But it's how the company uses it to be really successful at what it does and to give value in terms of products or services.
Yeah, and you're coming at it from a human capital perspective primarily, but your point is that for the same people, the same number of people in an organization, you ought to be able to have more output year after year as those people get better at their work and so forth. But that's not happening today, is it?
It isn't. I mean, at the sort of economic level, we know that productivity is very much flatlining. And we know that at the firm level, and I think this is what's very interesting, is that there are a number of firms that are absolutely at the top. They are the most productive. And then there's a very large number of firms that are just also run. And we know that for those top 10% of firms that are the most productive, the gap is widening.
So that means that they figured out the secret sauce, Marion. I mean, they seem to know how to get more and more out of their resources every year. What are they doing differently than those that are not growing in productivity?
Well, I think, we're aware that there are quite a few different drivers of productivity. And I think we often think about innovation or machinery or capital finance. But in fact, there's more and more work that's showing that actually human factors, people, account for a very large amount of productivity, probably 1/3. So in fact, there's a sort of rethink, I think, going on in terms of saying, we need to understand what some of these drivers are, the most important drivers. And actually, these drivers are related to people more than we thought.
But is it the individuals? I mean, so is the issue that, people are just not motivated, and so therefore you need to change the culture, motivate people, change out the individuals? Or is there something more in the technology and process that people use that's the issue?
I think actually, Steve, it's not. I mean, we can all be motivated and not productive. So it's about how the company really supports its people to be as effective as possible. Now, this might be in how they work, what they do, the nature of the actual work, the support that they have in terms of the infrastructure, the support of their managers, but also their own well-being too. So we know that there's a range of really in the report that we've done and the work we've done, we've identified sort of 6 factors really that are absolutely grounded in people and culture and leadership.
Okay, so talk about each of those 6 factors now.
First of all, we know that skilling, reskilling and upskilling, especially in this current age, is incredibly important. So that's to do with, making sure that your workers are equipped with the skills And these are sometimes hard skills, but as equally they're behavioral or cognitive skills, so that they can really provide value, and especially in this age of sort of technology. We know that management capabilities is another driver, a really important driver. And we can see that in the highest performing and most productive firms, managers and leaders account for a very large amount of that difference. We know that agility and resilience as an organization, and again, that means in very volatile times, the ability of the company to respond quickly to external changes in the business landscape. It means as well about having very adaptable and resilient workers. We know that another factor is diverse workforces, diversity in leadership, both managers, the board composition, and diversity in the people that you have. So a lot of diversity in thought, in background, ethnicity, you name it, diversity in all forms. And then finally, employee well-being, which is closely linked to that. So we know that if your people are thriving, they will be more productive. And then linked to sort of the skills and the management capabilities, I think is something around job design. And AI is really providing new opportunities for us to transform the type of work people do and how they do it and how they can be more effective.
Yeah, I want to come back to AI in a little bit because it's on the tip of everyone's tongue today. But let's just go through a couple of these. So this is again, you have to go back to what are we trying to accomplish here? Every CEO, CHRO leader in any organization is trying to get more output, more sales, more revenue, more productivity from the resources that they have. So your first point was upskilling. I know that that's sort of a buzzword in the human capital community, but really that just means that people take on, access more ability, right, in order to make them achieve more in their roles.
Well, I mean, we use quite loosely the word reskilling and upskilling. Reskilling is for companies when they move people from areas of work that are declining into new areas, and they reskill them. And so, for example, they can be heating engineers who then become experts in solar energy and solar panels. Upskilling is actually helping people to adapt to the changing needs of the business. It's widening their set of skills. It's probably making them more versatile. And for a lot of big companies, it's trying to help people just adapt very quickly, that the job is changing, jobs are merging. And so you try to really invest in a whole suite of skills that will help people keep adapting and growing with the business. So I think those are the key kind of concepts.
Yeah, it's interesting because I talk to so many people who say, "Well, I'm not an expert in that. Well, I don't know anything about that." And I kind of scratch my head because we're born knowing nothing about anything, and it's all about a learning process and continuous learning. And I think all you're saying here is that people need to continue to learn and grow, and that's part of the responsibility of leadership to provide those opportunities. But it's also dependent on the individual themselves to be interested in it and open to it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the mindset that people need. They need to be curious. They need to be open to learning. But I think when we talk about skills as a driver of productivity, what we're talking about is understanding what are the specific skills that your workers need. That is really difficult. The world is changing, jobs are transforming very fast. So when we talk to our companies about how they are doing their skills building programs, it is linked to often transformational change in the business, maybe a new business model, a new way of going to the market, new products, new services. And so they are really struggling to sort of say, how are jobs changing? What are the skills that our people need? So that's what it's all about. And it's a race because it's changing so fast that we're aware that there is almost not enough time to help people, reskill and upskill. So you've got to be absolutely precise about the skills that people need.
Yeah, leadership was your second one, and if that seems obvious, but what are you saying specifically leaders should do to enhance the productivity of their companies?
Well, I think that it's very telling again in productivity studies that actually managers and leaders have an enormous, a disproportionate effect on productivity. And I think we all know that, but I think to see it in black and white, to know that the evidence is there is very, very important. And I think that the evidence sort of suggests that it's both, it's interesting in that the evidence suggests that it's having enough leaders in the organization. So the most productive leaders tend to have a higher percentage of people in the organizations who are leaders and managers. And it's all about also about that they are high quality, highly skilled. And I think that again, so the evidence points to the fact that these leaders are very good at recognizing business opportunities. So there's a sort of an element of entrepreneurialism, an element of really a business acumen, understanding their business and the environment. B, being really good change leaders.
Yeah, but you've also written that there needs to be clarity of communication, that leaders need to be on the same page,
Mm.
consistency across, transparency, those kinds of things, which helps people understand the situation, and then, to provide, what's in it for them. So it's not always about, what's in it for the owners or the shareholders.
Mm.
It's also, what they have in stake, and so that has to be, motivational. So all these things need to come together in order to increase and enhance people's productivity. Yeah.
And that's absolutely the third trait of these very highly productive leaders
Yeah.
is what you would call talent management. Yeah, the ability to get the very best from your people, to motivate them, to support them.
Yeah, but anybody can do it, as long as they, you think about it, and you're deliberate about it. Again, there's so much made about people. Well, you either have the skill or you don't. Well, in some cases, yeah, there's a certain amount of that, but you can learn these things, and there are practices, and we've written about that as well.
Yeah.
The third area was agility. It's another human capital buzzword but I think all we're saying is, people need to be able to adapt to the changing needs of customers, the changing environment, and so forth, and move, adapt their strategies, and then, shift what they're doing. Is that a fair, description of what happens at the core?
I think it is. I mean, there is, we can talk about resilience and adaptability at the organizational level, and we can talk about it at the individual, the worker level. At the organizational level, I think that we've known for at least 15 years, we've talked about agility, but it's still difficult for companies. It's all about sensing and reading their environment, picking up those weak signals that there is about to be change. And at the moment, with all this sort of explosion of technology and Gen I being the new kid on the block, that's a challenge for companies to really sort of realize that sometimes step change is on the way. And in terms of individual resilience, yeah, it's about some very practical skills building, helping people to thrive, even though maybe there's a lot of uncertainty or there's a lot of change.
So much of it is inertia, and in an organization, you go in, at the same time every day, or you log on if you're working hybrid, and you do the same things, you do the same. There are processes, and you sort of get caught up in this flow. And in order to do something different, you have to change what you're doing. And I think that's part of what resilience is all about. The fourth area was diversity, and of course, there's been so much written by us and everybody else on diversity. It is so important. But tell us specifically why you think diversity and how diversity links to productivity.
There's some very strong evidence that shows that if you have a diverse workforce and if you have a diverse management team and board, you will see gains in terms of profitability, financial performance, innovation, collaboration. So I think that is, and that I think that evidence base is growing. And so I think it's for companies is to just keep going back to that even if there is sometimes some pushback of saying that this is really important, it's important from an ethical point of view, but it's important for the performance of the business and ultimately for the productivity of the business.
What do you say to those people? There are. I don't think anybody's arguing against diversity. I don't hear that. But what I do hear is people saying, well, the best firms just do everything right. They've got a great business model, they're diverse, and so forth. And so, therefore, the correlation with productivity is a simple correlation. It's not a causal correlation. I think what you're saying is that it is not just a simple correlation. I think it's also causal, and it's causal because you're motivating your employees, you're connecting with your customers, you're connecting with the community, and so forth, and all of that enhances the productivity. So it really is important at all dimensions. The next area you talked about was well-being, and I just well-being is just this whole gestalt area of, that if your employees are doing well, and it goes to health, it goes to how they're feeling, the security, and so forth. Just give us a little bit more on then how well-being attaches to productivity.
I mean, if I stand back and think about where we are in well-being, I think that well-being is important, has become more important and more central to how people perform, because actually we're asking more and more of people. Work is not just going in, as you said, and just doing routine. Work is all about giving that extra effort. It's being creative. It's being able to change. So in a way, you could argue that work is very taxing. It's very challenging, and therefore that the well-being of people is really important to productivity, people's ability to have that energy, to have that commitment, to have imagination. You need to look after people's well-being. So I think that productivity in this very knowledge intensive and volatile landscape, well-being, it makes sense that employee well-being is connected to productivity. We know it is as well through evidence.
We're talking about productivity in the workplace. We're going to take a short break and be right back. And when we come back, we're going to talk about AI's impact on productivity.
Mark your calendars for October 29th and 30th, 2024, because the Conference Board is hosting People 2030, Our Talent, Our Future, in Brooklyn, New York. This year's event promises to deliver actionable insights into the trends shaping our workforce and strategic decisions for a brighter future. Whether you're in HR, a company leader, or an industry enthusiast, this event is a must attend. At People 2030, you'll learn how to put people at the heart of business value creation. We'll dive deep into creating purpose for your workforce, unleashing potential, and ensuring high productivity through technology, innovation, and engagement. And we've got a special treat for our podcast listeners. Use promo code CSP600 at registration and save $600. These 2 days are packed with opportunities to network with industry leaders and gain knowledge that will propel you and your organization forward. Don't miss out. Head over to tcb.org/people-conference to secure your spot. Remember, promo code CSP600 gives you $600 off. We can't wait to see you there.
Welcome back to C-Suite Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland from the Conference Board, and I'm joined today by Marion Devine, Principal Researcher in the Human Capital Center in Europe. So, Marion, we're talking about the 6 areas that really contribute to productivity in the workplace, and the sixth and the final, and really on the tip of everyone's tongue today is AI. Talk about why AI is so exciting in terms of its impact on productivity in the workplace.
I think, Steve, that what we're seeing is, I mean, we are on the cusp, or arguably well advanced in terms of a huge revolution in how work can be done. AI is now, and generative AI is now something that's coming into the flow of work. It's something that everybody can use. It's something that is exploding in terms of its use through speech and images and language. And so I think that's what's happening, is that we are seeing that AI can transform how people work. Most excitingly, it can do the very simple jobs, the repetitive jobs, the administrative jobs. It can free up people, therefore, to do what is sort of essentially the much more human and complex tasks of imagination, creativity, relationship building, all those things that a machine in that sense can't do. So it's transforming work, and it can also make people far more productive because they can concentrate on the value that they bring to their organization.
Yeah, and people are afraid of this, and what's on everybody's minds is, oh, gee, is AI going to eliminate my job? But we don't see that, in the offing here. We see. I think the way you articulated it is really important for people to understand, that it frees people up from routine and allows them to use their humanness and in a different way. But in talking to CEOs and CHROs, we don't hear that this is all about productivity through job elimination. It's about productivity through enabling people to be even more creative and productive.
I think that's right. I mean, there are various analyses of what's the effect on jobs, and we know inevitably some jobs will stop. There will be a restructuring and a realignment, and maybe in the short term there will be some job losses, maybe in the short term. But I think certainly from my vantage point of talking to the companies in the conference board, there is a concern really to just sort of reskill and upskill as quickly as possible. Not to get rid of people, but just to help them adapt.
Yeah.
Because that's at the end of the day, you can't replicate people. We can all get hold of the same technology, but we can't get hold of the same people.
Yeah, it really reminds me in the mid 80s when the personal computer began to be adapted to the workplace, and people needed to be trained on how do you do a spreadsheet? What is a spreadsheet? And how do you use this Microsoft Word or any other tool? It took years of training, and people said, well, I don't know why I would need one for myself. Would just have one for the department, and that. So you just think about that transformation, but what it enabled, and we had huge productivity growth through the 90s as a result of the introduction. This is the next evolution of that. It's simply AI is simply ones and zeros. It's software which runs on these computers, but it is enabling people to be more creative and more productive in the workplace.
But I think when it comes to understanding the link between productivity, I think that we have seen that you can have a technology arriving and exploding, but it doesn't necessarily instantly translate into productivity. It's something about the adoption of technology and innovation. And that comes back to leadership, management, culture, people's openness and willingness to learn and experiment. So we come back to people again.
Yeah, exactly. And leaders need to enable people and train people, but they need to stand aside and let people figure it out, because they're inventing with these new tools, which is really really marvelous. Now the CHRO is really the nexus of these productivity tools that you outlined. Talk about the CHRO's role in enabling these areas of upskilling, leadership, agility, diversity, well-being, and AI implementation.
I think that probably one of the fundamental challenges for CHROs is to actually partly mobilize their own department to help their own people leaders and HR practitioners to realize that productivity is to do with them. Productivity is absolutely bound up hugely with people, culture, management. So, really helping the people function in itself to realize that productivity is very at the core of what it's doing. So, that's one task that the CHRO has to do, is to align that the people function, and within the people function they'll think very differently about productivity. If you're in service delivery as opposed to recruitment, you have a different sense of what productivity is. So getting that alignment within the people function, and then really just sort of going out to the business to help managers, leaders and people think differently about productivity, and to see that they have a role to play in that, to understand how important it is, and to understand that it's a win-win situation. If you're more productive as a company, you're successful, you can pay better wages, you can give people better opportunities.
Well, and the CHRO is such a key part of the C-suite, and helping to educate the C-suite and inform them, and really drive adoption through the C-suite. Talk about that role, because that's a skill in and of itself. It's almost like a salesperson.
I think it is, and I think part of this work that we've done is with the Productivity Institute, and they a big sort of mission for them is about helping the C-suite to come together on an integrated and strategic concept of productivity. Because what can happen is that you have different functions in different parts of the business, all with slightly different agendas, jostling different metrics, competition for limited resources, for limited investment. So there's something about the C-suite trying to bring all those views together, to tie them up together, and to have a strategy for productivity that makes sense across the business. The CHRO not only has a role to play in terms of making sure that the people factors aren't forgotten, to make sure that investment is happening in those key drivers, but also helping the team to align. And from sort of anecdotal conversations, these can be difficult discussions in the C-suite. There can be a bit of tension. There will need to be some compromises and trade-offs. And the CHRO, I think, can have a very big role to play in effectively supporting the team to do that.
we live in a multi-constituency world these days. I used to remember it by my title: customers, employees, owners, CEO. And I always felt that I was accountable for that. And then, of course, communities and environment. But how does worker productivity impact and how do you take into account the various constituencies when you're thinking about worker productivity?
I think when it comes to productivity, what we're seeing now is a widening of the view of what is productivity, and it is linked to this whole idea about stakeholder capitalism. Let's say that productivity isn't about the merciless, exploitation of resources. It's about making outcomes that benefit your customers, your investors, your employees, but also the communities, the places in which you operate. So it's a sort of win-win vision of productivity. And it's something that's saying, I think more and more companies are saying, what does it mean to be productive in a way that is sustainable and inclusive?
I think what you just said is so critically important, because when people hear worker productivity, they go, aha, but for the benefit of the owner, for the shareholder. And that's not what you're saying in this paper. What you're saying is the benefits accrue to the workers themselves. The benefits accrue, yes, to the owners, but the benefits do extend also to customers, because the customers feel, the impact of their interactions with your employees. And every business is different, but and then of course, community and environment. So all of these constituencies are affected positively by an enhanced worker productivity, right?
Absolutely. And I think, again, that comes back to the sort of partnership between the CEO and the CHRO in terms of creating this very positive narrative around productivity. Because if you're making certain efforts within the company and your employees are just hearing, squeeze more juice out of the lemon, it can be quite alienating. Or they're thinking, you're going to cut jobs, aren't you? You're going to ask me to do more with less. So it is about having this sort of vision, and the CEO and the CHRO linking it, to things like the purpose of the business, to linking it to some of its sustainability goals, to making sure that it's a narrative that energizes people.
Yeah, and it's an easy thing to do. You just have to be explicit about it, I think, is what you're saying, because so many of these actions over time have resulted in what you've said, which is downsizing or basically a negative impact on employees, and that's not what this is about at all. And so, therefore, you have to assume that there should be some native skepticism, and therefore, it's important to be transparent and to communicate well why and how this is going to be positive for the employee.
Absolutely. And I think just talking about it, because I was surprised when we were holding our discussions with our executive leaders, quite a few said, well, we don't actually talk about productivity very much. It's not something that leaders necessarily talk about. We don't talk about it to our people. And yet the more we discussed in these focus groups, the more people started sort of saying, but you know what, productivity is a function of leadership. It's something that we should talk about. So I think just talking about it, and then, as you say, making it transparent, then that is half the battle.
Yeah, it's so well put. Your paper is available at tcb.org, and just click on the Europe tab, and you'll find your paper. Any other final thoughts that we did not cover that you'd like to point out?
I think, Steve, just going back to my first point, and for me as well, this has been a bit of a discovery that productivity matters to all of us. It should matter to all of us. Don't just leave it to the economists. Don't leave it to the policymakers. Think about it at the firm level and think about it at the individual level, what we all can do to try and make our organizations more productive and successful.
Yeah, and be deliberate about it. It's not just something you measure as an afterthought. It's something that you deliberately target and try to impact through all of these tools that are in your paper. Marion, Devine, thanks for being with us today and sharing these great insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
You have been listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.